Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to bring you today's video. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's get started. In 1992, Colby Coombs embarked on the greatest adventure of his life. The young mountaineer, after a long preparation period, set out to climb Denali, North America's highest peak, with two close friends. Denali, with its summit reaching 6,190 meters, was not only the highest mountain in North America, but also home to some of the most challenging climbing routes in the world. The mountain's altitude and climate presented deadly dangers every year. Sudden changes in weather, snowstorms, strong winds, and harsh terrain conditions posed great risks to climbers. However, these challenges were not obstacles for Coombs and his friends, but rather hurdles to overcome in order to fulfill their dream. Before starting the climb, the team had made detailed plans and tried to prepare for every possible challenge. Weather conditions were considered the greatest danger while climbing to the summit, so the team had undergone training and gathered the necessary equipment to adapt to the mountain's harsh nature. However, no preparation could fully protect them from the unpredictable power of nature. The beginning of the climb went as expected. From the starting point, the weather was relatively calm, and the sky appeared clear. The first challenge they faced was the steep slopes and snow-covered inclines of the mountain. However, for experienced mountaineers, this was a familiar sight, and overcoming it with proper climbing techniques was an easy task. Although the cold weather, depth of snow, and terrain conditions were tough, the group remained quite optimistic. As the days passed, they continued their ascent, each feeling the thrill of approaching their goal with every step. In the evenings, they lit fires at the campsites to battle the cold and gathered strength to continue the climb. Every step brought them closer to the summit, but consciously their bodies were reacting to the increasing difficulties. However, after a while, the real danger that all team members would face began to reveal itself. On the third day of their climb, the weather started to change rapidly. The light wind throughout the day suddenly intensified. Then came the snowstorms that reduced visibility and caused the climbers to lose their sense of direction. As they moved towards the summit, the sky suddenly darkened and they were enveloped by a completely white blanket. The snowstorm intensified so much that every snowflake made it harder to stay on the icy ground. The storm was much fiercer than the normal conditions of the mountain. Initially, the team members, who hadn't suspected the wind would strengthen, realized that the combination of the intensifying wind and the cold increased the level of danger. The climbing speed began to slow down due to the rapidly dropping temperatures and fierce winds. Though they tried to encourage each other by talking frequently, the climb was becoming much more dangerous. Every step turned into a great struggle to endure the harsh conditions of the mountain. As they ascended to higher altitudes, the oxygen levels began to decrease. This caused the team members' muscles to fatigue more quickly and made it harder for them to breathe. High altitudes rapidly wore down the body, increasing both mental and physical exhaustion. Coordination deteriorated, and every step became more difficult. Each climber, while trying to understand the signals of their body, was engaged in a mental battle. They pushed their limits, but at the same time they fought the feeling of burnout as they struggled to take one more step. Although the team members tried to encourage each other, many of them were battling fatigue and weakness. Most of the team members took breaks to find something to eat and occasionally to take in more oxygen. However, each break meant less progress. In this climb, making faster progress was vital to keeping them alive. The entire team knew this reality and was trying to push through the situation. However, despite all the preparations, mountaineering sometimes turns into an unpredictable battle. And Denali, by forcing the team to match its pace, was preparing them for its toughest test yet. As the team advanced towards the summit, they felt they were getting closer to their goal. On one side, snow-covered mountains. On the other, the last rays of the sun disappearing on the horizon. This scenery encouraged them to take a few more steps. However, nature was powerful enough to deceive even the most experienced climbers. Although their climb had been difficult, everyone believed they would reach the summit somehow. but no preparation could ever fully equip them for such disasters. That day, just a few hundred meters from the peak, they encountered an unexpected change in the weather. As evening began to fall, the weather suddenly worsened. At first, there was just a light breeze and a few clouds, but it quickly transformed into a snowstorm. This was a situation familiar to every team member who had completed their mountaineering training. However, it developed so quickly that no one could have predicted how severe it would become. The storm began by reducing their visibility. They struggled to open their eyes as snowflakes hit their faces and the wind grew stronger with every step. At high altitudes, each step mattered. The team, determined to move forward, was also searching for a safe spot. But the storm halted their progress. And now each climber was not only taking steps but also struggling to find their way. The storm intensified rapidly, and snowdrifts disturbed the snow balance at various points on the mountain. As visibility dropped to nearly zero, they suddenly heard a loud rumble. It was the sound of an avalanche, the one sound everyone feared. The avalanche seemed to shake the entire mountain. The wind and storm's speed became an unpredictable force. Before they could comprehend what was happening, they were swept away by the snow. On the high mountain, the falling snow masses engulfed them in seconds. In that moment, Colby was thrown by an avalanche wave. The snow covered everything, swallowing their bodies and everything around them. A momentary panic overwhelmed Colby. His vision blurred and he struggled to breathe. Suddenly, he was confronted with a massive snow mass. The last thing he remembered was hitting his head against the rocks. His consciousness quickly faded away. Hours later, when Colby opened his eyes, he found himself in a dark and silent world. The avalanche had left a huge echo, and a silence reigned over everything. He had a deep and severe wound on his head, and the pain was so intense that it felt as though his entire body had been paralyzed. Every part of his body was covered in ice-cold snow, and in some places it was frozen. His arms and legs felt like burdens, preventing his body from moving any further. With confused thoughts spinning in his head and sudden pain, he tried to open his eyes. But everything was blurry. Everything seemed lost. As he lay there for a while, it was difficult to accept the reality. His eyes were still searching for something in the darkness. The pain in his body kept pulling him back, but in that moment there was only one thought: survive. He decided to look for his friends, but in the lost world, knowing who was still alive seemed nearly impossible. Colby began to crawl through the snow with his frozen arms. Every movement added more pain as it combined with the freezing cold of his body. Slowly and weakly he moved forward, but there was still hope inside him. Maybe my friends are still alive, he thought. The snowstorm and avalanche had covered everything, but finding a trace, or at least seeing a light, could help him. However, with each step, he came closer to a vast expanse of empty snow. He found no signs of them. Everything was pure white, and neither he nor his friends were shadows lost in the snow. Due to the avalanche, the snow layers surrounding them had swallowed everything, consciously erasing their presence. Colby's mind was blurry, but he knew he had to do something. He had to fight to survive and escape. He thought about his friends, the ones he had lost, but the only truth he felt was the pain. He may have lost his friends, but survival was the hope that could save him. Slowly, with each passing minute, his body grew heavier, but he kept crawling. Driven by an inner urge to do something against the disaster brought by the avalanche, he continued moving. Colby's instincts told him something. You have to get out of here. There was no other option. His survival instinct guided him. Slowly, in pain, he began searching for an escape. His body felt as though it was paralyzed, but his mind was still working. Using every moment to gather his courage, he continued to crawl. As he lost strength, moving through the snow became increasingly difficult. But there was only one thought: survive, escape, and one day be able to tell the story of this disaster. When Colby Coombs regained his composure, he clearly realized how much things had worsened. As he opened, the snow and ice covering him seemed to freeze every part of his body even further. His whole body was showing signs of frostbite. He could feel nothing in his hands and feet, and his hands were almost completely numb. But there was something. An instinct, a drive. He had to survive. In that moment, everything was clear. Either he would continue and somehow try to get out of this hell, or he would die here, in the cold and hunger. If he stopped, the cold would consume him faster. He would weaken and he would vanish, so stopping meant death. His body ached incredibly, but somehow he tried to move. Slowly, he began to crawl across the snow-covered ground. Every movement caused unbearable pain. Each part of his body seemed to rebel against him. Every muscle resisted contracting and relaxing, but Colby's mind kept telling him one thing: keep going, you have no other choice. He could no longer feel his hands and feet. A cold sensation spread throughout his body, but the fact that he didn't feel certain things was a sign. That sign was his only chance to survive. The cold reminded him how close death was, but stopping meant staying here with his frozen body. Every movement on the snow and ice sent chills down his spine. Every step felt like a wall between him and death. As he continued to crawl on the snow, his frozen body kept pulling him back. Breathing slowly became almost impossible. He began to feel pain in his chest, his broken ribs causing more pain with every breath. Blood dripped from the wound on his head, but everything was so frozen that even the blood seemed to be frozen. His thoughts were confused, sometimes blurry, sometimes clear. He had lost track of time. How much time had passed? A day? A few hours? As he crawled for hours, perhaps days, he couldn't comprehend the passage of time. The snow and storm had intensified so much that all he was doing was moving. He truly wanted to survive, but he didn't know where to go. He had only one goal: to reach a safe place. He kept crawling forward. With each step, he fought against the hardness of the frozen snow and ice. Every movement felt like his body was breaking. But somehow, his survival instinct kept pushing him forward. A voice in his head kept repeating, "Go, keep moving, don't stop." After a while, hunger and thirst became an even stronger force, weakening his body further. He couldn't find anything in the snow because everything was frozen. As his stomach growled, the emptiness and hunger inside him became more overwhelming. He hadn't eaten in a while, as during the climb, everything had become more difficult, and as their burdens increased, they had left their food behind. Now, as he crawled through the snow and ice, hunger was rapidly taking over. Thirst also progressed quickly. The snow-covered mountain offered him nothing to drink. No water, no food. Slowly, he lifted his head and saw that everything was white. The frozen ground made the continuation of life impossible. Every drop of water in his body froze in any part of his body, making him even weaker. As hunger and thirst combined, they plunged Colby's body into an internal battle. The more he moved forward, the more exhausted he became. But despite the pain, his mind kept trying to give him more courage. Don't stop. Do something. You must survive. Each step, forcing his entire body, kept him moving. This voice in his mind kept pushing him forward, but his physical strength was running out. As he crawled across the snow, he felt chills. Sometimes the thought of stopping crossed his mind, but he had to shake that thought out of his head. After a while, nearly exhausted, Colby finally, slowly but steadily, came across a trail of some sort. In that moment, he felt that everything might finally change. Perhaps there was a way out, but this was his last effort. With the survival instinct, torn and buried by the avalanche, he continued to push forward a little more. He was exhausted, but hope was his last remaining strength. As his eyes began to close, he tried once more to move forward. His body was truly starting to give out, but that inner voice kept reminding him that survival was his only option. These final steps would determine his life. For 5 days, Colby Coombs fought to survive in the frozen mountains of Alaska, staring death in the face with every passing moment. Each hour, each minute, felt like a moving caused him to feel as if his body was paralyzed with each step. But if he stopped, he would freeze to death. Every movement caused pain to shoot through his body. Walking, climbing, or even taking a single step became harder with each passing moment. Snow blindness had blurred his vision. In the middle of the sea of white snow and ice, nothing was clear. Even with his eyes open, everything seemed to vanish in a blur. He couldn't see his left or right, nor could he see ahead. Time passed. Colby's body and mind began to wear each other down. His thoughts became increasingly confused. Battling hunger and thirst, he couldn't grasp how important each minute was. He had no idea how much time had passed. With each step, he tried to keep moving forward, driven solely by his will to survive. Hunger caused him more pain. His stomach kept growling, but he found nothing. The snow offered no food. Slowly, with each passing hour, his body weakened further. His situation had become something that could only be explained by his survival instinct. The wounds on his body were at risk of infection. His neck was broken, his ribs crushed, and his skin frozen, with every cut making his skin even more fragile. The blurriness in his eyes was a great disadvantage. He couldn't see his surroundings clearly, so he had to take each step cautiously. The cold seeped deep into his body, making every movement harder. His body felt like a dead weight. Every part of him seemed to be rebelling against his will to survive. On one hand, his body's weakness, and on the other, the will to survive in his brain. Colby was constantly torn between these two opposing forces. On one hand, there was despair, and on the other, a glimmer of hope. Every day he managed to move forward a little more, surviving this unexpected battle. But he didn't know how far he had gone, how much fatigue he had accumulated, or how much farther he could push himself. His body felt as though it couldn't fight any longer, but the desire to survive was above everything else. One morning, while Colby was still moving through the same dark and frozen landscape, his vision cleared for a moment. In the whites around him, he saw something. In the distance, far away, he noticed something faint. Even though his eyes were blurry, it could be a settlement or the tracks of a group of people. Desperately, he decided to move forward a little more. After seeing this, his survival instinct grew even stronger. This might be his salvation. He continued forward slowly but carefully. The cold hindered him with every step, but he only knew one thing. In the distance, there was a light of hope. That light gave him even more strength. After some time, his vision finally cleared and he saw human tracks. With each step, he found more strength. Slowly but steadily, he followed the tracks. He was exhausted and spent, but he gathered the last of his energy. These were human tracks. He could reach people. In that moment, with his hands and feet frozen and every part of his body beginning to feel paralyzed, Colby's mind had only one thought. Salvation was just a little further ahead, moving forward step by step. Reaching the end of those tracks was the only thing he had to do. The storm and snow still surrounded him, but somehow, he didn't lose his courage. These tracks could save his life. With hope, he kept going, because turning back would have meant his death. Finally, as he continued to follow the tracks that might lead him to salvation, a group of mountaineers spotted him. They were survivors, individuals who had managed to stay alive and were still continuing rescue efforts on the same mountains. Colby's vision had become blurry by then, but his instinct showed him the truth. These were human tracks. Salvation was near. After 5 days of a life-and-death struggle, Colby Coombs' body was completely exhausted. Crawling through the snow and ice, each step reminded him of how difficult the fight for survival was. Slowly, with great difficulty, he kept moving forward. His mind was cloudy and his strength had worn thin. His body felt foreign to him, and the pain with each step deepened. His frozen hands and feet were numb, and it felt as though his body had turned into one that fought against his will to survive. But Colby continued to survive, guided by his survival instinct. Each movement was an effort to take another step forward. However, his body seemed unable to endure any longer. There was only one thought in his mind. His mind was filled with complicated thoughts, but one thing was clear. If he continued to follow these tracks, perhaps he would find a way out. His goal was clear. The end of these tracks might lead to people, to salvation, to life. But he was so tired that each step felt like it could be his last. But moving forward was the only option. Stopping would mean certain death. After a while, the human tracks became more defined in the distance. Colby, straining his eyes, continued to follow the tracks. He couldn't perceive how much time had passed or how far he had gone. There was only one thought in his mind. These must be human tracks. I can survive. Despite snow blindness and the injuries to his body, his blurry vision, he somehow kept moving forward. For a moment his heart raced. Could it be a rescue team? In that moment, a spark of hope appeared in his mind. With his last remaining strength, he kept going, slowly, but steadily. At that moment, with his eyes completely blurred and his body completely spent, Colby had to take one final step, just one more. And then he came across a group of mountaineers. At first he had been so undetectable, but now he had become barely noticeable. He was exhausted, on the verge of collapse, his body at death's door. But his survival instinct had brought him this far. When the mountaineers spotted him, all he needed was to open his eyes, and the rest was clear to them. The mountaineers quickly assessed him and realized he had passed out. They immediately understood the extent of his injuries and signs of frostbite. He had severe wounds, infection risks, and frozen areas of his body. They had to act fast to bring his body temperature back to normal. They were racing against time to save the man teetering between life and death. A rescue team was called, and without delay, they informed them of Colby's critical condition and began administering first aid. The mountaineers carefully lifted him and carried him toward the landing zone for the helicopter. His body was so cold and frozen that the arrival of the helicopter would almost determine his chance of survival. With heated blankets and intravenous fluids, they worked quickly to revive him. His body had been weakened by the cold climate for an extended period, so immediate intervention was critical. The helicopter quickly landed on the mountain peak, and preparations to transport Colby to the hospital began immediately. During the journey, even though the mountaineers were exhausted, they did everything they could to give him one last chance. They constantly provided first aid and tried to assist his body in reviving. Once the helicopter landed at the hospital, Colby was rushed to the emergency room, where doctors began treatment immediately. He was in critical condition due to his neck fracture, rib injuries, and signs of frostbite. However, the doctors said it was a miracle that Colby had survived. Many people with such severe injuries wouldn't have made it. But he had miraculously survived. It was a powerful example of the intersection of nature and humanity, where the will to survive had reached its highest point. When Colby Coombs won this tragic and horrifying battle for survival, both he and his world were reshaped. Although the trauma he endured was severe, the experience showed him how powerful the human spirit could be. Doctors believed his chances of survival were very low, but Colby defied all odds, overcoming every hardship and pain, and miraculously managed to survive. Though physically weakened, there was a strength in his soul that reconnected him to life. This miracle was not just a survival story. It was a testament to human will and determination, pushing the boundaries of what one could endure. After being hospitalized, Colby entered a long and difficult recovery process. His body carried the marks of the disaster he had lived through, but his spirit underwent a deeper transformation. The 5 days of struggle for survival had not only given him physical resilience, but also brought about significant mental and emotional changes. He was no longer just a mountaineer. He was a man who had survived. The loss of his friends would forever weigh heavily on him, but somehow keeping their memory alive and sharing his own experience with a wider audience gave him purpose. Colby's recovery process was long and challenging. As his neck fracture and rib injuries healed, permanent scars remained on many parts of his body due to frostbite and the cold. However, the biggest scars were in his mind. His mind was filled with permanent marks from the nightmarish journey he had endured. Each morning when he woke up, the memories of the survival battle came alive with him. Despite all this, he believed that the strength that came with surviving, with being alive, was incomparable to anything else. Above all, the loss of his 2 friends was the greatest pain he carried. Their memory would always exist like a shadow in Colby's life. He wanted to build something from their loss by keeping their memories, their lives, and their struggle alive. Forgetting them, or erasing their memories, felt like a betrayal of his own survival struggle. Keeping them alive and at least helping other mountaineers improve their survival skills against nature's harsh conditions became a mission for Colby. With these thoughts in mind, Colby decided to establish the Alaska Mountaineering School. Mountaineering was not just a sport or hobby for him. It was a way of survival, a battle against nature, and an opportunity to dive into the depths of his soul. Inspired by his own experiences, Colby wanted to teach others the intricacies of survival. He believed that mountaineers should learn survival techniques, not just how to climb to the top. Nature was an unpredictable force, and climbers' ability to survive wasn't about conquering it, but learning how to live with it. The Alaska Mountaineering School included a series of tough trainings preparing students for harsh weather conditions, emergency management, avalanche detection, first aid, and snow survival techniques. Each student was prepared not only to climb the mountain but also to learn how to survive. This school was a reflection of Colby's and his friends' survival stories. The purpose of the training was to prepare students for the challenges they might face on the mountain and ensure they could survive even in nature's harshest conditions. When establishing the school, Colby made sure to personally observe every student, talk to them, and understand the challenges they were facing. Every training session at the school felt like a survival lesson. Colby knew that every student through his eyes was also remembering his friends. The training at the school was not only about technical skills, but also focused on building strong mental resilience, determination, and psychological toughness. Colby's experience became a story that deeply impacted every student at the school. Not only did Colby open a mountaineering school, but he also shared his experiences with the public. Through conferences and seminars, he told people about his miraculous survival and the journey of staying alive. His story inspired many and helped people survive with perseverance and belief. For everyone interested in mountaineering and outdoor sports, Colby's story became not only a tale of survival, but also a shining example of determination and resilience that pushes the limits of human willpower. Colby Coombs' life represented the determination people demonstrate when overcoming the greatest challenges in the fight for survival. He became a symbol of the survival instinct, a man who tested the boundaries of endurance and determination. After the disaster he survived, every step was a battle for survival, and ultimately, he became an inspiration to others. As he shared his own struggle, he also showed how others who survived catastrophes could overcome their own challenges. Colby's story was not just about the fight against nature's forces, but also about how strong and determined the human spirit can be. Beyond his miraculous rescue, Colby Coombs' life embodied the power and will to survive no matter the circumstances.